Welcome back to your show, where we continue our Decision 2008 coverage. Here to answer your questions this week is John Lerew, who is the Republican challenging Congressman Ed Perlmutter, the 7th Congressional District. Mr. Lerew, welcome to your show.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Doyle Forrestal from Lakewood writes in. She's a Colorado native who appreciates the wild areas her state offers residents, as well as the boom to tourism. That said, she's suffering greatly from increased prices at the pump. She wants to know, with your oil and gas experience and the time you spent working on the pipeline, and I know we were just talking about this, it was a while ago.
Yes, it was.
She's curious about your position on opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for drilling, and if we do open ANWR to drilling, how soon are Coloradans going to feel the relief?
Well, I think ANWR, you're talking about a very small parcel of land compared to the size of that whole area. I worked up in Prudhoe Bay, so I've seen what happens when you drill in the Arctic area, and they're very conscientious about the environmental aspects of it. And that was 30 years ago when I was 18. So even now, technology, everything is much more advanced. So going in ANWR, good thing to do, should have been done 10 years ago. And a lot of the issues with energy and why it takes so long for, say, oil or natural gas to get to the market is a lot of the regulatory environment. The permitting process takes a very long time, needs to be expedited.
One of the other issues involves Nancy Codweiss writes in saying even if we do offshore drilling or drill in Alaska or wherever, the current refineries can't handle all of it. She wants to know, are you willing to support refineries here in Colorado? If not, why not?
I'm very much into modernization and getting more refining capacity online. It's interesting to bring that up because British Petroleum is trying to expand the refinery in Indiana, spending about $3.8 billion, a lot of money. Well, the minute they announce they're going to do that, the next thing they have is a lawsuit filed against them, environmental group, just to halt the project. So we have energy companies that are trying to bring product to us, like myself, and we need to encourage that.
So
help the consumer.
Let's go big picture then. Jamie Elam from Aurora wants to know, what's your energy plan to end our dependence on foreign oil within the next 5 years?
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to see more exploratory and more harvesting of the coastal region, bringing more oil to the market. It can be done through a faster permitting process, regulatory environment. Also, at the same time, improving our whole refining capacity. Last refinery built in '79 in Washington at Cherry Point had to deal with Prudhoe Bay. We need to get on the stick and move quickly. I mean, that's your answer for the next 3 to 5 years. And then, past that, continue to do alternative energies, biofuels. That's all great, but there's an economic viability. And the working poor in this country, they need to have the fossil fuel because they're not going to be able to afford electric cars, hybrids, and they can't pay the $40,000, $50,000 it takes for a hybrid. So we've really got to be concerned there.
And in the short term, is there going to be a break from gas prices at all?
Yes, I'm one of these people who believe market economics, that just the idea when the executive branch came forward and said that we're going to lift the executive moratorium on drilling offshore. I mean, we had a correction in the oil price by 20%? We're down to about 128, 124 barrel, from 144. Mm-hmm. So it does work. The market will listen. Just to the threat of the idea that you're going to bring more fossil fuel to market brings the price down. And you need to do that.
One that Jackie Estabel wrote in, and it relates to both the energy bill that was passed, the last couple of energy bills, and some of the tax breaks that were that were offered to oil and gas companies, both for renewable products as well as for fossil fuels. But she asks about, would you vote to continue those tax breaks currently offered to the oil and gas companies, as well as continue the president's tax cuts?
The current tax cuts are on the books. Yes, I want to keep them. I'm also capital gains. I'm against any type of tax on capital gains. I'm against the death tax. I'm going to put that's on my website. You can see that. You have to give some type of incentives to certain industries so that they pursue a certain course of action. And so you definitely want biofuels, alternative energy. There's a lot of questions about ethanol. There's a lot of questions about the use of corn and what it's doing to grocery prices and driving up all of that. So, quite frankly, I need to look at each one of those independently, but you must do some type of subsidizations towards certain industries if you want them to go a certain route. Yes.
I want to segue to the topic of the war in Iraq. We've had a lot of candidates who have come here and been asked roughly the same question, but this question comes from Jack Ott in Lakewood. It says, in May of this year, your opponent, Congressman Perlmutter, voted aye on a bill in the House calling for the redeployment of U.S. troops from Iraq by December 2009. If you're elected, would you support such a bill that establishes a firm timetable for withdrawing our troops from Iraq, regardless of the situation there?
The problem I have with timetables, it almost comes across to me that why don't you just tell the enemy what road you're going to be leaving on as well? I mean, why not just tell them when you're leaving, put the troops in greater risk? Now, I don't like timetables. I like the idea that you go along the course of action we're doing, and until we get some type of real strong stability and we feel comfortable leaving, then we leave and we pull the troops out of there. So I agree with that. And the surge worked. So
Laura from Brighton kind of writes and follows up, says, do you support staying in Iraq for as long as necessary to achieve what the president considers victory? And I guess maybe I'd ask you kind of on my own, what do you consider victory?
In Iraq, I consider victory. They basically have a constitution in place. Their government is more of a tribal type entity. And so the type of government that works in the United States does not work in Iraq, but you want stability between the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds. Once you have that, you can begin to leave. One of the big issues right now there is oil. And how are you going to disperse the revenue? And we've got to make sure that there's an equality there on how you do that for the people in that country. I think that's a real key. Then you can start pulling troops out. We already are. I mean, we've already started taking troops out of there from the big increase when we had the surge. So,
your opponent has been here a couple of times talking about the issue of embryonic stem cell research.
Okay.
Karen from Lakewood writes and wanting to know if you would have voted for the House bill that was supported, actually co-written by Congresswoman DeGette, but that would fund embryonic stem cell research from the federal funds. You in favor of that?
Just mentioning her name, no. I would not be in favor of that.
Why is that?
Well, I'm basically, life begins in the womb. I believe in that. And I don't necessarily think there should be federal funding to support that type of research, no. A lot of it's going on overseas in Europe and so forth, but no, not in the United States.
Another issue he got asked about when he was here, Shannon Vandevinger writes in from Wheatridge, I hope I pronounced her name right, saying she's 33 years old, married a 7-month-old daughter. She's just finished paying off student loans.
Okay.
Her husband recently paid his off, but she'd eventually like to go back to school. She's also starting to think about putting away some money for her kids' education. Her question for you is, do you support what the House Democrats did in their push to make college tuition tax deductible and cut student loan interest rates?
I like the idea of cutting the loan rate. Education is the foundation of our country. And as you know, I'm a certified financial planner. That's a big topic, education. You've got to make it affordable. And a lot of folks, the only way they can afford to go to college and graduate and so forth is to borrow money. So you should have a very low interest rate on that. It's interesting, tax write-offs and tax, it depends if you have an income coming in. I mean, tax deductions only help if you're creating some type of income. A lot of times when you're a full-time student, you might have a part-time job and so forth. So that may not work. I'd rather see a very low interest rate and a very long period of time to be able to refund that back and pay that loan off.
We've got about a minute left in this segment. Let me ask you for an opportunity to share with voters, what do you think they need to know about you?
I think during the time of some of the financial issues that are going on in the federal government level and the issues with mortgages, banks, it's a good opportunity to send someone who has a financial background and has worked with people for like 25 years or so in the area of financial planning and investment. I understand those areas and would be very good in Congress addressing them. It's very important at this time.
John Lerew, thank you so much for being on your show. You're going to stick around and answer some more questions?
I'm going to stick around and answer more.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Okay.